Lisa Conway. Good morning. Thank you
Good
for
morning.
thank you for joining, Lisa. I after watching you at a webinar, which was Chicago Leadership Forum, right?
I think it was Green Biz, actually.
Green Biz,
Yeah,
Green.
yeah.
Right. I said I need to reach out and see the wonderful things that you're doing. For all of you joining us today, Lisa Conway is VP of Sustainability, Americas for Interface, doing amazing things. The Global Flooring Interface is a global flooring manufacturer that is leading industry to love the world. She and her team are responsible for regional activation of the company's mission, Climate Take Back. She is passionate about bringing awareness to the interconnectedness of environmental sustainability and human health, designing healthy. To drive understanding of the impact of carbon on human health, Lisa and her team provide educational programming around the need for transparency and prioritization of embodied carbon in specifications within the building industry. She co-founded the Materials Carbon Action Network, Materials Can, in 2018 to mobilize this effort. Lisa also serves as the chair of the Sustainable Advisory Board for Penn State University Smeal College of Business and is one of the executive board of directors of the nonprofit Building Transparency. And I just found out this morning, she's like, you have this beautiful tattoo here. I mean, you're like, you
Yep.
carbon. So you are teaching us here to love carbon when the narrative has been carbon is evil,
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about why we're loving carbon all of a sudden?
Yeah, it's such a cool. I didn't create it. It was created by our chief sustainability officer, Erin Mizan, and a whole team of people that were really weighing in. But it's actually true. Science is telling us that in order to reverse global warming, we're not going to get away with just reduction efforts that we're doing now. We're also going to have to store carbon. And carbon is actually not a bad thing, even though, like you said, Alicia, the language around it is we want to have a war on carbon, we want to fight climate change, we want to slash carbon emissions. Carbon is a building block of life. We're all made of carbon, plants are made of carbon. We just have put too much of it in the wrong place. So we've taken it from deep within the earth in the form of fossil fuels, and we've burned those for energy and released that carbon into the atmosphere. So now what we have to do is think about that carbon in the atmosphere in terms of the circular economy. We want to take that waste carbon and we want to reuse it. We want to bring it back down, back home where it belongs. And we can do that in a myriad of ways, but one of those is storage in products that we're all, buying and specifying anyway.
Mm-hmm. I love the way Janine Benes talks about carbon too. I mean, it's just so poetic the way she mentions it, and she just says, "Hey, carbon are the building blocks of
Yep.
who we are," and it's really, and that's when she said that, I was like, I really grasped towards that. And you guys at Interface are really changing the narrative on carbon. It's not evil, it's actually what trees are built out of and
Yep.
stuff. And so thank you for that. And actually right now, the APMonarch team, we're taking the Carbon Love and Learn session.
Yeah.
And we're loving it. Yeah.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
We're thrilled to have you. And I'm so glad that you picked up on Janine. So Janine was one of the people who was weighing in on what Interface's new mission should be, and this language around loving carbon. And I think that everything that Janine says is poetic.
Yeah, it's just very, I just love it. So the opportunities and challenges, Lisa, let's talk about that and what the US is doing to decarbonize, because right now we're in a state of emergency, I think,
Mhm.
and time is of the essence. And we're adding building stock faster than any other time, in history, right? So what is it, on your perspective, how are we decarbonizing with materials?
Yeah, so a little bit of the history is really just that programs that our industry is familiar with, like LEED and others, have been really focused on operational carbon tied to operational energy. Materials have, in the assessment of materials, have really been tied to human health impacts.
Mhm.
We've been talking a lot about the ingredients and the toxicity of materials, and all of that is very important. There's also a carbon role to play when you're thinking of the specification of materials. So it's not either or, it's an and. And we are working from interface through these carbon love and learns, but also the industry in general is providing a lot more awareness, education, and tools around how we can think about the embodied carbon, which is by definition, it's the greenhouse gases associated with making the materials. So making the materials that make the buildings. That previously really hasn't been measured or thought about at any great scale. So the important movement that's happening now is, yes, it's an additional criteria that everyone has to learn about. However, once you learn it, you don't have to relearn it, right? So once you assess a given material category, you kind of know the attribute-based rules of thumb for specifying a low carbon material. So for instance, in one of our flooring categories is carpet tile. Nylon is the big driver of embodied carbon. So, even if you're not looking for the exact kilograms of CO2 per square meter, you know that by specifying recycled content nylon, that you're taking a great step towards lowering the embodied carbon of that product. That's not going to give you any toxicity trade-offs or anything like that. So what we're really hoping that everyone will start to do is just slowly, by material category, knock off one at a time and learn that category and include it as part of the decision-making criteria. It's never going to be the only one, but currently it's not one at all. So that's really what the movement is doing. And hopefully we start to see that in things like legislation and policy, in standard spec development, as firms create common specs that kind of get copied pasted from one project to another, that research just kind of carries through and everyone doesn't have to, it's not a whole lot more billable hours, in your world.
Yeah.
It's all about billable hours.
Yeah. And, so cities across the US are, hunkering down and creating policy, right? And so it's based on like energy, operational carbon, right? And then we have our embodied carbon that's kind of new territory for many of us.
Yep.
And so the challenge is, I believe that this embodied carbon is understanding it and how to track it, and how are manufacturers going to also be involved and help us, like help each other, right? Um, in Chicago, we're not to be left behind. So we're also planning on this decarbonization policy so that we can help reduce this climate change. Some of the challenges that I thought when I started to see this is, okay, first we were tracking ingredients, toxicity, right? And because that does impact our health, from a manufacturing perspective, all the way to, we spend over 90% of our time indoors, right? So what are we breathing in? And now we're tracking carbon reductions. So you said something great, just like, half an hour ago, we were talking about this with, carbon versus ingredients. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've really seen is that natural materials are lower in carbon than synthetic materials, than virgin synthetic materials. So the one mistake that we can't make is that if a material is, for example, red list free, or has been vetted by, some other type of program who is considering toxicity, we can't just assume that it's low carbon. And the reason for that is, and I'll use the example from a carpet tile perspective. A carpet is generally synthetic. The nylon face fiber is synthetic. The backing is generally synthetic and almost entirely oil derived. You can lower that carbon footprint of that material significantly by using recycled nylon or recycled inputs into the backing for a carpet tile, for example. That can lower its carbon footprint, but it's not necessarily natural. Interface has used some natural materials to further lower the carbon footprint, even getting to carbon negative or carbon storage, which is awesome. But the most important thing is that you have to measure the embodied carbon of the material. You can even take natural materials that we can ruin the carbon footprint of by over processing them, especially processing them using non-renewable energy, et cetera. So it really just depends on the category. In the category of carpet tile, there's a big disparity, a 10x disparity between the lowest and highest embodied carbon for that category. Not every category is the same. So you really just kind of have to dive in and see, see by product category, how different it all is. We also make an LVT product and everyone's kind of the same. There's not as huge a difference. Hopefully that'll happen over time, but that measurement piece is really important. And just by specifying, red list free or something like that does not ensure that the product is also low carbon.
Mm-hmm. So what if I feel overwhelmed with all of this?
Of course.
Where do we get started? And you're talking about measuring, right?
Yeah.
Are we measuring, or how do we, on top of, being the architect, on top of designing or specifying, where do we get started, Lisa?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I like to have fun with this, as you can tell. I like to create community around this topic and divide and conquer. Because if one person is going to, like I give the example, in a firm, there can't be the one person who works on embodied carbon. I really recommend dividing out a manageable number of material categories. So if you're doing new construction, core and shell is the most important to start with. If you're doing renovation projects, you want to think about envelope and you want to think about interiors. So divide a manageable number of material categories, and the material categories that I recommend starting with are the ones that are in a new and free to use open source tool called EC3, the Embodied Carbon in Construction Calculator. That has 9 to 11 material categories that would be in any given project, fewer if it's renovation. And starting with those, because those, number one, have data built out in the tool based on third-party verified EPDs. A lot of people in our industry have heard that term, environmental product declarations. These are third-party verified analyses of life cycle analysis data from manufacturers. So you can really count on the data. That's all you really need to know. If you don't want to page through these 14 to 23 page documents, you can use that tool and somebody take responsibility for carpet, somebody take responsibility for drywall, somebody take responsibility for concrete, and just get familiar with that one product category. That way in your office, everyone has embodied carbon responsibility. You just might have specialists by material. The one category that really varies a lot by region is concrete. Concrete is a lot more, city or region specific. And depending where you are, you may have thousands of EPDs. So if you're in, California or Portland or Seattle, you have potentially hundreds of thousands of EPDs in the system. If you're in Chicago, you might have less. If you're in Kansas City, you might have even less. So based on your project location, whoever is responsible for concrete, and that may be, in your case, it might be an external consultant, maybe a structural engineer, they can be responsible for that category and get familiar with how much embodied carbon is on the table by just doing a better specification. There are studies that have come out from RMI recently, the Rocky Mountain Institute, that did some research on a few case studies and showed that there was, I believe, don't quote me, but it was between 24 and 47% reduction available for projects for less than 1% cost premium. Wow. So we are, unlike retrofitting and operational carbon, there's a lot of money on the table just by doing the assessment, not by doing retrofits and having a significant investment involved. So that's actually the exciting part. You said it can be overwhelming. And I think, you're in Chicago, I'm in Philly. I think that this is, it's a specification and procurement strategy, as opposed to something that you have to allocate a lot of dollars to. It's really just that measurement piece.
And, we have the ability, we have the resources and the data to do this, to make this change, right? It's just a different way of doing things. And with this measurement, I wonder if we can come up with like, with food, they have a farm to table, analogy. How could we, I don't know, make one for the building industry, right?
Yeah. Well, the good thing is like, so certifications, for example, are super helpful, but they're also limited in that there's a certain way of thinking that a certain certification is built to, right? One of the things that I'm excited about, even in the consumer market that's starting, is carbon footprint labeling. And that is nothing more than a stamp saying what the carbon footprint is. We're starting to see this in food. Companies like Just Salad and even Unilever is actually committing to a certain percentage of their products by the end of this year having that carbon footprint label. So if you and I are looking at oat milk, in the grocery store, and they all taste good, they're all a similar cost, we can start to use that carbon footprint as part of our decision-making criteria for what product to buy. Allbirds has started doing this for shoes. We need to just start seeing more of it. We have it in our specification, for example, but we haven't really moved to full labeling. But I think that will really help people make the decision faster. And it doesn't need to be, someone doesn't need to create a certification. We just need to use this already available third-party verified documentation in a more specifier-friendly way, if that makes sense. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I say it time and again is that we have the tools at hand to do this. Just going back a little bit to policy and reduction, you often talk about the moonshot, right? And sometimes it's like, because it does seem overwhelming. Can you, and then this is where you sound poetic, you talk about the moonshot. Can you elaborate on what that means?
Yeah, I mean, I don't get out of bed in the morning to measure how much less bad we're doing. I haven't known you for that long, but I can tell that you don't either. Right? We want to be measuring good. That's the ultimate goal. And part of that is the measuring less bad as we get there. But the moonshot is for buildings to be part of the solution to reversing global warming. Right now, buildings are responsible for 39% of global carbon emissions annually. How can we flip that on its head and make buildings responsible for 39% of carbon storage annually? I mean, that's what gets me excited. And I'm fortunate enough to work at a company where we're starting to see that in a product, but that needs to be scaled to all of the materials and products that make up a building, including, the rest of our products, to be able to make that a reality. But if that was a reality, like, how cool would it be that, you guys aren't doing a LEED project to measure that, this is one of the least bad buildings, out there. It's a shining star, but it's actually, net positive. I mean, that makes our work so much more exciting, and bringing people along for that, I think, is that sense of community that we've kind of touched on, is how can we build community around that moonshot? Because this is hard work, that we can get burnt out.
For sure.
And I think that it's having fun and doing it together and building that community that makes it feel rewarding and makes us able to keep doing it.
Yeah, it does feel good. It feels rewarding, and who doesn't like to be in a space that feels good? Yep. Right? I mean, everybody wants that. And as I was thinking about this morning and having you here, Maya Angelou came to my mind, and her quotes, right?
Love her.
Her quotes of, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people always remember how you made them feel.
Yep.
And that's really our target, because people need to feel comfortable, people need to feel joy, people need to feel functional in a space, right? Yep. So if we can do that with the resources like the EC3 tool that's available, there are certifications available, we can certainly do that. I love the way you flip that around of, 39% carbon or 39% storage, right?
Yeah.
It's changing that narrative. It's a great way to look at it. Are we loving carbon yet, or what?
We're getting there. We've got a whole group of carbon lovers out there. You're one of them now. And I really think that the topic is one of these things where once you know it, you can't unknow it, know? And it's even to the Maya Angelou quote, and that one is one of my favorite of hers, is once you've kind of internalized the responsibility that we have in the building industry, because you and I in our consumer lives have so much less of an impact than we do through our work in the building industry. It just pales in comparison. So I think once people kind of get that spear in the chest, like our company founder had, they can't shake it. So there are people out there starting carbon leadership forum hubs in their cities, or joining ones that already exist. They're out there telling this story. They're out there talking to their clients. They're talking to coworkers. And I certainly feel the movement. I don't think it's just me who's a psycho about this.
We have to change that narrative too. We're not psychos.
We're not psycho. I like being a psycho though. I think there's a lot of great people out there, and I think that this pandemic has made us start to do things in new ways. You started this podcast, which is getting more awareness out there to people. Everyone kind of, I think, took the time to reflect and want to come out of this doing things in a better way. We've kind of seen what it's like if a global catastrophe happens. And that's no different than climate change. Our main highway through Philly here is completely flooded. I've never seen that in my almost 20 years of living downtown. Our Schuylkill River has just expanded and has flooded the city. What else do we need to experience to really know how important and how responsible we have to conduct ourselves in our industry?
Well, that's a great point, is because we're so disconnected with the impacts that a sense of urgency is not really there for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Look at, the marginalized communities, what's happening at the most people who are just been vulnerable historically. That's who it impacts the most on a day-to-day basis, on their health, their environmental, surroundings. If we're not feeling it, if we're not seeing these floods in our backyard, then what's the rush? If the fires aren't, in our backyard either,
Yep.
what's the rush?
Yeah.
So it's a good point that you brought up, and the pandemic definitely disrupted things, especially in the building industry. And I've heard you say this before too, is that there's a vaccine for COVID, but there's no vaccine for climate change. That I was like, oh my gosh, she's right. There isn't.
Yeah, it's true. In fact, I think it was Diane Hoskins that said that, and it was like an article quote, and it was so well said. And to your point about this is actually the first time that something has happened in my backyard regarding climate change that I've felt so I guess like physically in my community. I often help people with the connection between that the CDC provides, which is that climate change is the greatest threat to human health of the 21st century. Full stop. And people don't realize the connections of longer, warmer seasons, insects having more of an opportunity to breed, and more Lyme disease. My mother and my grandmother have Lyme disease. It's been a huge issue here in the Northeast, but it's also across, the rest of the US and North America. So there's so many ways that we don't realize climate change is actually affecting us. I didn't realize until maybe a couple of years ago that I've been taking a daily allergy medication, but I still never really feel my best from a respiratory perspective. So there's all of these things that are happening to all of us, never mind the marginalized communities that you're talking about. Carbon emissions don't go up in a pure sense. They come with a lot of other toxicity that permeates those communities where we've just placed energy production in places that we felt like, people didn't have the means to fight back in the political ways that actually make a difference. So we have just plopped, all of that nasty production in places that are completely unfair. So we have to do everything we can to use as little of those resources, being burned in those communities as humanly possible. It's all just so interconnected.
Yeah, it is. It's interconnected, and just by understanding how it is, we can continue to create change. Yep. Lisa, what are you reading? What do you read on besides carbon articles and that?
Yeah.
Book the other day, and what was it?
Well, two, there's one called Sacred Instructions that came up, and the other is called Braiding Sweetgrass, which is actually what I'm reading right now. So you and I think we're talking a bit about the influence of Indigenous peoples and really how they already have all of this figured out. We just have been too egotistical to listen to them. We want to be able to include or require our own way of doing science and kind of not include their way of thinking, which may not speak in our scientific language. What we're realizing is that we need Indigenous peoples now more than ever to be able to help us share their ways of resilience, and other communities too. We think about the African American community who has come here, and I mean, how much more resilient do you need to be than being taken from your lands and figuring out how to make these lands work, right? It's just incredible to me once you really start digging into history, how much we've ignored those voices, and the incredible knowledge that they have for really what we should be doing. And hopefully we take more of that into consideration as we move forward. I think that a lot of us already are.
Yeah, I feel really like fortunate to be in this space because people are pretty open, are more open to ideas, hearing, even though we can do a lot better listening to the indigenous peoples of sacred instructions, right? Yep. Listening to women have this natural state of nurturing. That's what we do, right? And so we have a different way of approaching things, a different way of, stating things. So I do feel very fortunate of being in this space, because sometimes if I'm not in this space, it's a different world. It's like,
yeah. No, I think we're naturally drawn to others that want to do similar things. I was actually introduced to those books through the book All We Can Save, by co-edited by Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and Dr. Catherine Wilkinson, who really pulled together, I think it's over 30 essayists, along with poets and artists as well, to just kind of tell the stories of women on the front lines of working on climate. And hearing all of those voices and what everybody's working on gives me incredible hope. It also gives me that moment that I shared with you of, well, I'm not doing enough. Never doing enough.
So I'm just, it's not real, but.
Oh, nice. You got it. We've got it. We're tattoo sisters. You just have to draw it on every morning until you get the official one.
Every morning until I'm bold enough to get a real one.
To do it. I was 37 when I got my first one.
First one.
Yep.
A number of them, huh?
Yeah, just two.
Well, Lisa, we can continue talking, but this has been absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your insight and the work that you're doing at Interface. We're definitely at APMonarch. We're already, on board with the EC3 tool and using it on projects, especially now that certifications like LEED have pilot projects to reduce carbon and tracking it. That's what we will be doing. Next week, we have 3 lab designers, and I'm so excited, from Hera, and they design laboratories all over the country. And we're going to talk about the energy consumption and what they do to reduce the energy use and reduce carbon. So this will definitely, continuation of that.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to listen into that one, because labs are their own challenge. So I think that's a really exciting topic.
They are, and they're pretty amazing. And it's just like when you can take a subject like carbon or labs and make it sound poetic, for me at least. It's, who doesn't want to listen, to create that change. So
yeah.
Lisa, thank you so much, and I'll see you again soon.
Sounds great. And thank you for all the work that APMonarch is doing. You guys took this topic and really dove in. So it's so awesome. And you have a great team.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Healthy day.
Bye-bye.